there's a lot of implicit trust that's needed. And that is needed with, you have to build that with a handshake, with partnerships, with long-term relationship building, not with really sleek and sophisticated software. So that's kind of our learning along the way. But it took us 3 to 4 years and almost $500,000 to figure out that problem. And so we always came up with the notion of, no conversation is a failed conversation if it leads to another conversation. But ultimately, you need to talk to the customer. And I think a lot of people fail by presenting their product and what their product can do without actually listening to what the pain points of the customer
Right.
are first.
So, and then obviously you kind of figure out maybe like 1, 2, 3 different 4 pain points of the customer, and then you kind of have in your mind, does your product really solve that problem or not? If it does, that's great. If it doesn't, you kind of refine your product a little bit, and then you go back to follow the same process.
It was going to the table with a set of questions that really dug down into their pain points and evaluating what their kind of magic wand solution was, right? If they could wave a magic wand, what would be the solution? And doing that en masse so that we could actually plot out the answers, look at outliers.
It's all free, right? You're offering the product
Yeah.
to customers, and it's all free. Hello, friends. Welcome to Pointed Hunters podcast, where we have been exploring minds and hearts of entrepreneurs who have been disrupting industries. Um, so, this episode is specifically about entrepreneurship, and we're going to take some time to understand and answer some of the questions on how to be an entrepreneur. If you have a product, what does the product do? What is the value proposition? Who's the target market? How do you find out? How do you build on your product to make sure that it really solves the problems, and a bunch of other things. So we have the pleasure of talking to Hart, who is a founder, who has been a founder for many, many years. He's the founder and CEO of RentPanda. And I really thank him for joining us today to answer all these questions. And during this time, if you have any questions, any further questions, feel free to just put a message in the comment box, and we'll try to get them answered as soon as possible. And if you have, and I'll leave some resources for you in the link in the description. So feel free to check it out. And I hope this conversation helps you as an entrepreneur. Let's get started.
So RentPanda provides software, provides leasing services, provides property management, provides paralegal services, education, coaching to small landlords in Ontario.
When you were talking to all these landlords, none of them came up with, hey, a software could be a good idea. Just curious, how was it that finally you came thinking of software as a solution for this?
The reality is when we went back to the drawing board and sat down with them, the problem was actually a fear of unpaid rent and tenant caused damage. So it wasn't that they couldn't find tenants, that there weren't platforms and tools to find tenants. It was that element of lack of trust and lack of transparency. And so a software wasn't going to solve that problem. It was service. And ultimately, we hated to admit it, and it took a while because as, a software startup, you have a lot of ego, right? You think your software can solve anything. But ultimately, we were in the real estate world, and we had to acknowledge that sometimes with high value assets like properties that need to be leased out and managed, there's a lot of implicit trust that's needed. And that is needed with, you have to build that with a handshake, with partnerships, with long-term relationship building, not with really sleek and sophisticated software. So that's kind of our learning along the way. But it took us 3 to 4 years and almost $500,000 to figure out that problem.
Um, just to cover a little bit about your previous experience before you started up, RentPanda. You mentioned that you were in advertising, and I'm just trying to connect the bridge between, your startup could be something that is different from your field, or it may be aligned with it, right? So I'm just like taking your example of how did it align or it did not align? Because I'm sure there are different entrepreneurs with absolutely different backgrounds, and who are like exactly the same background. So what was a little bit about your, background before,
Yep.
starting up Rent Panda?
For sure. So I started in the world of digital advertising essentially. So I started an internship post university at an agency called McLaren McCann. I was working on General Motors, and this was in the early days of social media, actually. I'm probably dating myself, but this was when, you could call up Facebook as an advertiser and talk to someone.
So it's fair to say that you had a, really good, you had a good understanding. You were almost like a marketing expert in the field at that time.
Yeah.
So you could like understand that, okay, this is the product that I have or I'm thinking of, and here is what the step-by-step path of marketing would look like.
Yeah. Yeah, for
You
sure.
were absolutely clear on that path.
As clear as one can be.
Okay. Okay. I
Yeah.
mean, so the reason I ask is because it gives a decent advantage, I would say, or a fair bit of advantage. Now you have almost like solved the marketing problem, or almost like you know how to kind of go about it. But the main issue that you have at hand is the product itself. How do you know, or how did you know at that point that yes, this is indeed a product, or maybe in other words, this is a product, there is a product market fit, right?
So ultimately, it comes down to talking to the right people. But when we sold the first landlords on using Rent Panda, the tech platform, before we put one line of code down, we came up with the idea and went to individual landlords and said, "Would you use something like this?" And actually got them to like, we outlined it and got them to write down like, "Yeah, I'm interested in this product." And so we always came up with the notion of, no conversation is a failed conversation if it leads to another conversation. But ultimately, you need to talk to the customer. And I think a lot of people fail by presenting their product and what their product can do without actually listening to what the pain points of the customer
Right.
are first.
So, and then obviously you kind of figure out maybe like one, two, three different four pain points of the customer, and then you kind of have in your mind, does your product really solve that problem or not? If it does, that's great. If it doesn't, you kind of refine your product a little bit, and then you go back to follow the same process.
It was going to the table with a set of questions that really dug down into their pain points and evaluating what their kind of magic wand solution was, right? If they could wave a magic wand, what would be the solution? And doing that en masse so that we could actually plot out the answers, look at outliers.
It's all free, right? You're offering the product
Yeah.
to customers, and it's all free.
Yeah. So the first product was completely free. It was just, a tech platform for them to use.
Right.
The second time we did this, it was paid service, but we weren't really looking for customers at that point. We weren't trying to sell a product. We were trying to do market research.
How do you get to that point where your product starts to generate some revenue, and or you think that it's ready enough that you can have some customers come in? And so that's one thing, that's one question. And how do you maybe get into getting your first 5, 6, 10, your initial customers? Because I
Yeah.
believe that can be a little bit of challenge.
Yeah. So, you know, I would say two things. One is you have to fake it till you make it, right? And ultimately, you can spend years, if not decades, building the thing that you think will be perfect. But if you truly understand the pain points and the problem that you're looking to solve, usually, in most cases, sheer force and grunt work can solve the problem where technology can add on later.
Right.
That one book, and again, I'm going to forget the author, but they call it the Wizard of Oz solution, right? And ultimately, you could feign having the best piece of technology out there. You could have the most sophisticated AI tool ever imagined. It can be a human being behind the scenes doing, the AI analysis, right?
Yeah.
Because to the customer, the job is getting done, right? So you can always push through, and it's never worth waiting until a product is perfect to launch that product. Do a beta test, do a pre-beta test, get some early customers. Revenue is not important. Give things away for free to get insights on whether or not your product is actually going to solve the problem. Because ultimately, down the line, a little bit of revenue, is not going to change anything in the trajectory of the company, but an insight will. And so if you can truly understand early insights and continue to evolve the product as it's live and working, people will be understanding. So I would never hold back. And I think, again, this is a learning where we overbuilt a tool. We spent $250,000 building version 2 of Rent Panda, which was just, our post MVP.
Right.
We should have launched it after spending $80,000.
80,000, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a hard lesson to learn, especially when we're not that company anymore, and none of those funds are ever coming back. But it's a really important lesson. So, you just done is better than perfect by any means. And I would even go to so far as to say half done is better than done. Just get
Right.
it out there.
Right. And I mean the point that I really like, the point that you mentioned about funding, right? I mean in your case we are talking about 200 to 50,000. A lot of times startup founders, financing or getting money is a tight thing. I mean, you
Yeah.
don't really have it and you don't really have a revenue coming in. So first of all, I'm curious, was it like your own funding, or maybe did you get some funding, or was it a bootstrap, or kind of putting your own money onto the table to start up with things? And yeah, maybe let's just
Yeah. We bootstrapped for a very long time. And then we tapped into a lot of government grants early on. So I would say, utilizing free money, truly free money, is a great way that a lot of entrepreneurs don't think about. And it can take, 1 year of bootstrapping and really stretch that out. So we bootstrapped for, 3.5 years. But we were also doing things on the side, right? So for the first year and a half of Rent Panda, I was working a full-time job.
there is some sort of a motivation that really needs to keep an entrepreneur, going. How do you really keep the trust in yourself and your product, through this time? I mean, 1.5, 2 years, when you have a lot of questions being pointed at you, a lot of questions that, people are asking you. What was this motivation?
Yeah.
And yeah, and how do you think that this motivation can be different for different people? I mean, different people can have different, but it cannot be, you're doing it just for money, or maybe, something else.
Yeah. Um, I'll flip the question and say that, like, ultimately it's not about motivation. Because just like working out and losing weight, there are days when you are not motivated, right? There
Mhm.
are days when you wake up and you will not be motivated 100%. And in an entrepreneur's journey, there's days and there's weeks and there's months when you're not motivated. And I would say, the startup journey for the first year and a half, 2 years, I was probably motivated, and you're motivated by the idea that you can build something better. We were motivated by the idea that there was opportunity in improving the world, right? So, yes, it's a bit existential in improving the world, but the opportunity is there, right? You can make money and build something that makes people's lives better. But, being a successful startup means surviving. And now, 8 years in and having survived, we're not a startup anymore. Motivation gets even harder, right? Because running a business is a hell of a lot harder than running a startup. Because now you've got revenue coming in, you've got food that you have to put on the table for not only yourself, but employees, 20 plus employees. And consistency and persistence will always beat motivation. So starting from the top, I mean, go to the federal government's websites, the provincial government's websites, and the municipal government websites, wherever you are, and look up funding for startups and look at all of the buzzwords that your startup has. AI based. We were based out of the north, right? And so Northern Ontario got more funding per capita than Southern Ontario. So we went with that. So go to ontario.ca, to canada.ca, and now there's a lot of like tools that will help you figure out what funding you're entitled to. Talk to the local chamber of commerce, talk to local innovation centers. There's representatives at those innovation centers that are meant to help startups get funding. The same thing with big government programs like FedNor or IRAP, or even SHRED. They will point you in the right direction. And then talk to those around you. So getting in touch with other startups, join startup communities, entrepreneur communities, and talk to those people about how they started. Most entrepreneurs that have survived more than a couple of years would be happy to talk to young startups and entrepreneurs. They've all been there, like I mentioned right at the start. If someone called me up tomorrow and just asked for 15 minutes of my time to help navigate, IRAP, I'd be happy to help out because I know the intimate pain that was going through government funding. So, you have to be, again, back to like grit. You have to be gritty and say, who's in my network, who's in my network's network, and who's in my network's network, and really push to just have more conversations, because that will help realize money that's out there, opportunities that are out there. If you're just in a bubble building a product, you're never going to succeed in the long term.
So, I mean, there's all these wonderful insights that are coming through, and I am sure that it's really, really useful for, somebody starting up, just sharing your journey and how you figured out things. I'm sure that a lot of things will be helpful. I'll be putting some of these in the description. I wish we had more time, but maybe we can do a little bit, maybe we can do something, in the future again as a part two
Sure.
or something, right? As a continue of our concept conversation. But I would just like to thank you for being a part of this. And
Sure.
thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Great chatting with you.
Nice talking to you.